no book I've ever read, I've read I don't know, hundreds, so to say, of books on spiritual formation, theology, which I love, and I'm not down on it all. But none of those books shaped me the way that the Lord of the Rings did, as far as to love who and what I ought to love.
Right.
Got into my heart and my imagination, and it made me love the Bible more and understand the Bible more. And so I was just like, I just began to be more and more appreciative of the power of storytelling, of faithful storytelling.
From the Florida Parent Educators Association, home of the largest homeschool convention in America, this is the Not by the Book podcast. I'm your host, FPEA Chairman Suzanne Nunn, and together we will hear from guests who share their journey to who and where they are today. Each one of them at some point left the expected path, ripped the page out of the book that says, you have to do it like this, and made their own way. I hope these conversations inspire you as much as they do me. Today I have a sit down with S.D. Smith, author of the best-selling adventure saga, the Green Ember series, and founder of Story Warren. Sam's tales captivate readers across the globe who are hungry for new stories with an old soul. Not merely safe stories with old school virtue and moral imagination, but stories that are bold, daring, truthful tales of light that help shape children who become dangerous to the darkness. You'll be encouraged by Sam's own story of finding his way to becoming the well-loved author he is today, as well as his advice to storytellers who may be hesitant to brave putting pen to paper. Let's listen.
I grew up in the hollers and hills of West Virginia, a particular holler, a particular hill. A holler for us is kind of a hollow between mountains.
Right.
You kind of drive back into the hills. And so I grew up back in the holler. My dad said that we lived so far back in the woods that no one lived behind us. And when I was a little kid, I thought that was real. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. It was kind of, maybe that was like a little bit of a birthplace for a little bit of fantasy or fantastical thinking. I had a pretty big imagination even then, but I loved the scope of the woods and kind of like how far, what would happen if we kept going. And we used to play in our creek and in the woods and caves and the hills around where we were raised. And my dad was building a log cabin on top of a basement so I grew up kind of living in a basement that was below an unfinished log cabin.
That's an adventure,
that never got finished. My parents we went to the mission field instead of finishing that, and that was. But for my career right now, I'm a writer and that's my job. I write stories, fantasy stories. So the roots of that were definitely in that play as a kid. I had the privilege of not having a phone. I mean, we had a rotary phone,
Right.
the that people are not familiar with these days, but we had that kind of a phone, but I didn't have the ability to satiate my boredom at any time. So I had the privilege of having a lot of boredom, which was induced, a massive amount of creativity. I think I played.
It breeds the imagination, right? Boredom breeds imagination.
It does. It's so vital. It's it's so hard to seek out because it's uncomfortable but yeah, I think it's an absolute essential thing for a person who's working in sort of the imaginative fields or creative fields, and maybe for all of us in a lot of ways. But that was my life as a child. Now, so I didn't know it then, but I was sort of like practicing what I would later do as a career, because I was making stuff up. I was world building. I was making up stories all the time, playing and building and that kind of thing. So that was a massive advantage, and I loved it. It was beautiful. There's something special about being in creation, and my parents were very devout Christians, and so I was raised going to church, and my mom really taught us the Bible when we were little. We memorized Bible verses, and so there were challenges. It wasn't we were living in a basement, and we weren't wealthy or anything like that, but we had a different kind of riches, I think. And just like any family, there's dysfunction and imperfection and all that kind of stuff. But I look back on that on my childhood, on my the way what my parents gave me, with a lot of gratitude for what they did. And they were really pioneers, and maybe particularly, well, both of them really. My mom was a real pioneer. Like, she would have been like, there was nobody that homeschooled. She eventually did. We eventually did homeschool, but dad would sort of sacrifice and do extra jobs so that we could go to a Christian school. So they were kind of like early days of that movement. So we went to a little Christian school, and they kind of they did things that were unusual. Made a lot of choices that were kind of unusual at the time, which was sort of like they were sort of the forebearers of what would become this sort of like school choice. And a lot of these, what I would consider really heroic moms, who are very, very invested and care and making a lot of decisions and really heroic and pioneering. I think the mom was kind of like that type of a person, but like before it was cool, or before there was much support,
Well, I like to think of it as the blessing of being different. You're willing to be different.
Yeah.
And it leads to amazing, amazing things. You said, though, that they left the cabin and went into the mission field. So did you go with them? Were you still young when they went to the mission field?
Yes, I was 12 years old when we left our home, and we went to South Africa. And so I turned 13 in South Africa the day Nelson Mandela was released from prison. So I was there when I went to South Africa. He was in prison, and when I left, he was the president. So it was a fascinating time to be there. And so, so I've had this sort of Appalachian and African. I call myself an Afro-Latin because I had this sort of like mix, growing up of spending time in the hillbilly hollers, and then also like in the Zulu townships of South Africa. And
wow. How long did you stay there?
I was there from basically 12 to 18. I was most of my teenage years. I was there. The first church I was ever a member of was a Zulu church that my dad started with, along with a Zulu pastor. And so, I had that probably, a lot of these things sort of probably explain how I ended up having an unusual vocation in life. That's definitely, these experiences definitely were formative for me.
Did they continue to stay in the mission field and you moved?
They did. I came back and went to college, and they were in Africa for a while longer, and then they went to Puerto Rico, which was actually, it was funny because they initially were going to go to Malawi and couldn't get into the country of Malawi, so we were going to go to Africa. Then we were going to go to Puerto Rico. We were on missionary deputation for a long time. We were trying to go to Puerto Rico, and that was like the plan. We were going to go serve naval families there, and then there was a kind of a crisis in South Africa that my dad was asked to go sort of like be a part of helping. And he did. And it was a good thing, I think, that he did. And so that we sort of, then they ended up going back to Puerto Rico later and serving. My dad's an Army veteran. And he ended up serving people in the service there, mostly Navy families, for many, many more years. And now they're back home in West Virginia. Both my parents are still living, and I love them. I'm so grateful for them. I mean, just, it's so radical, even just in these days, like just to have parents that sort of stayed together and took us to church, like, sort of the basics, and didn't, harm us. And, they were, that's really good, but they went way beyond that and gave us
solid foundation.
So much. Yeah.
So you left Africa to go to college, you said? So when you left, did you know what you wanted to do as far as a career, as far as what your major would be? And had you begun to start writing at that point?
I didn't. I actually, when I came back, actually, I did one more year of high school. Actually, I graduated from high school when I came back too. So I didn't. I had sort of finished high school as a homeschooler, but I sort of wanted the experience of being able to graduate from high school in America. So I actually graduated a year late because of that, and then went on to college and worked the whole time too. We weren't super wealthy, so I was always working as I went through college. But no, I didn't know. I was a creative kid, that kind of but I love sports. I played sports all growing up. So it's kind of, I wasn't the usual kind of like read all the time kind of kid that people would think of turning into an author. I didn't read very much until I was 16. I really fell in love with reading. So I became more and more of sort of literary or thinking like more intellectual or philosophical, cerebral. I kind of became more and more of that
Mm-hmm.
as I got older. But I was more of like just a sports kind of a kid, and I stayed with that. I loved sports, played sports in college, but I didn't know. I wrote songs, and I that was a big outlet for me. When I was really little, I wrote little stories. So I kind of, there was always this sort of like, I describe it as being sort of haunted by
Yeah.
the vocation of a storyteller, that I didn't ever really, I could look back and see, oh yeah, I was world building as a kid, and oh yeah, I used to write these little stories, and I always was kind of fascinated with it, but I wasn't a reader, which is kind of funny. But then I fell in love with reading, and also fell in
Right.
love with like songwriting, like Rich Mullins and
Oh,
Michael
wow.
Card and Keith Green
Those are
and
some
Bob
great
Dylan
names.
and Johnny Cash, and like loved songwriters so much, and so that would just, so I wanted to do that, and I did that for many years,
Okay.
and almost, but in college, no, I didn't know. I mean, I would write songs. I thought, well, maybe I'll be a singer songwriter kind of thing. I played music with my brother Josiah, and we would kind of do stuff together. But I didn't, and I kind of thought, oh, I like plays. I helped direct a play in high school, and I kind of thought, oh, maybe I want to be a director or film,
Right.
write for film or something. But I didn't really. I wasn't disciplined. I wasn't focused at that time. I was just trying to figure it all out, and it took me a lot longer to sort of like get into a creative vocation more fully.
Yeah, but you did have a creative bug all along. I think it's interesting when we see where we kind of land sometimes. I know I never would have imagined as a kid that I would be doing what I do today,
Mm.
but I can look back now and see, the way it was set up a little bit for me in my early years even.
Mm.
But it's one of the interesting things about our stories. So you went to college but not really focused on writing or doing anything with literature. What was your plan?
Well, I went to a Bible college, and I love the Lord. I love Jesus and
Mm-hmm.
love Jesus now, and that was the central part of my life. So I thought, I'm going to follow Jesus, and I want to know the Bible, and I want to be around other people. I'd taken some classes out of school, and it was, I think it just at the time, I think different kids are wired differently and can sort of withstand this or that. And at the time, I thought, man, this is just a lot of instruction in folly, and I didn't want that. I wanted to be more surrounded by. I thought at that time I wanted to be surrounded by people who were serious about the Lord, and so that was a big deal for me. And so I went to
Right.
Bible college. And my degree was in Bible. My emphasis was in missions, and I kind of thought, well, I'll probably be a missionary. I
Mm-hmm.
love the Lord. I wanted to share the gospel, and I care about that and care about the world and people. And
Right.
so that was probably what I was thinking at that time. But I also had this real strong tug toward creative work as well. And
Mm-hmm.
so I probably felt a little bit divided. And I think my view of the doctrine of vocation and the doctrine of creation, like, was not very robust, and was becoming more and more informed. I was beginning to see more of a world where God made the world, and the implications of that being that all these things in the world are good gifts from God. That being a father, being a mother, that being a policeman, being a farmer, that you didn't necessarily have to be a missionary or a pastor in order to be obedient to the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
Which was a little bit of the culture that I grew up in. Was a little bit of, there was emphasis like, well, there's the full time Christian service, and then there's like things that support that, and
Right.
they're kind of like second class. But this robust view of the doctrine of vocation, that God is loving us, that He's giving, that God feeds people, that feeds children through a farmer, through a supermarket, through a mother, through a father,
Mm-hmm.
like making the sandwich, that God is calling people to do that, to serve, to love other people. And I was getting a bit of a more of a robust view of what the arts were and how God can and is using and has used. And I was seeing it in my own life through people like the classics of J.R.R. Tolkien and
Mm-hmm.
Lewis, and just the spiritual and in every way, the way that those works informed me and shaped me. No book I've ever read, I've read I don't know, hundreds, I'd say, of books on spiritual formation, theology, which I love, and I'm not down on
Right.
it all. But none of those books shaped me the way that the Lord of the Rings did, as far as to love who and what I ought to love.
Right.
Got into my heart and my imagination, and it made me love the Bible more and understand the Bible more. And so I was just like, I just began to be more and more appreciative of the power of storytelling, of faithful storytelling that didn't necessarily have to be like, and then they got saved, and that kind of a thing. That there was this robust sort of view of creation and vocation, and that was starting to develop in my heart and in my mind at that time. But I was still probably like, I don't know, should I be a missionary? Should I be I cared about the world too. I thought about going into politics very, very strongly. I cared very much about the pro-life movement and still do. And so I was thinking, there was kind of a decision point. At one point, actually, I was offered a job in politics to work at the State House in West Virginia. And I was at the same time really like working on my first sort of manuscript of a book. And I had this real moment of like, I feel like this is a crossroads of like, which way should I, and I think both are valuable. We need Daniels in the world and we need C.S. Lewis's. And I was like, what am I called to? And it was a real moment for me. And I kind of, at the end, I thought, well, there's a lot of people sort of trying to change laws, but I don't know how many people are trying to change hearts and get inside us the way that the cultural stories do, the way that Steven Spielberg or Walt Disney and these people that have influenced our culture in this massive way. And I thought, is that what you're calling me to, Lord? No, not presuming any kind of scale like that, but just like, is that what I should be doing, Lord? Is that the most effective way for me to use my gifts for the kingdom? And that, so I chose that route, and I'm grateful for that. But it was a big, that was a big point. So those are all the things that were going on in my mind, like ministry and politics and culture and these kinds of things. But the Lord really put on my heart to be a storyteller.
When was that? How old were you?
That was, I don't know. I'm not real good with the whatever side of the brain, the people that remember details really well. That was after I was married, and we had some young kids at the time. That sort of like, that was probably 20 years ago. I don't know, 20 years ago, I would say. Probably 15, 18 years ago, something like that, where that sort of decision point was happening.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, and you say, it's so funny to me that you say you had not really been much of a reader until you were about 15 or 16 years old. So then I have to ask, when did you read Tolkien and Lewis? When did you really get into that?
Yeah, immediately. I read the first book I read that was like, oh, this could be fun. I may have been 15, late in my 15. I was 15 or 16, but I read Ender's Game book, fiction book by a Mormon author, and it just blew my mind as far as like, I thought, wow, this is just a really amazing book, and it was just fun, and I thought, oh, reading could be fun in this way I wasn't really tuned into, and really cool. So that was like a gateway drug for me, and I was pretty quickly on to Tolkien. And read The Lord of the Rings. And Mom had read us the Chronicles of Narnia when I was a kid, so I was already exposed to that. But I read it again, and read Till We Have Faces, and read the Ransom or Space trilogy, and read The Great Divorce and Mere Christianity and all that. I sort of got into all that over those next few years. But I was pretty quickly into Tolkien, and that blew me away. And I've read, and then the years subsequent, I read it again and again. The Lord of the Rings I've read, I don't know, probably 8 or 9 times, and absolutely enormous for shaping who I am.
That's incredible. Sure. Yeah. So you had your moment and thought, what am I supposed to do? Right. And which direction? And now we know kind of the end of that story, which direction you went anyway. But tell me a little bit about your first manuscript and just kind of working through your characters and the creation of, this world you've created that's an amazing, fantastical place to visit and to learn.
My first manuscript was it didn't. Nobody's seen it. I mean,
nobody has seen it.
A few people. Yeah, it's kind of like that classic sort of a thing. It's in the drawer, and I needed to write it. Mm-hmm. And I just say that as an encouragement to people who are like think that maybe the Green Ember was my first book and it just blew up or whatever. Right. And that's not generally the case for people. And it wasn't for me. I've written a couple of other books, and neither one of them has seen the light of day, and probably never will, because they're probably not good enough. And that's like, you have to sort of get good at being bad. I think as a writer, that's one advice I give to young people is that, like, when we're, you're always bad at something when you begin, whether it's a sport or technical thing or whatever. And if you can have the humility to like sit with how uncomfortable it is to like not be good at basketball with the other kids at the playground for a little bit, and you keep doing it, you'll be okay. You'll get there eventually. Maybe you won't be Michael Jordan, but you'll be able to play and enjoy it. And it takes a humility, and I think that's so hard because particularly a lot of creative kids have good taste. So they've been raised on reading these really wonderful manuscripts, and then they try to write, and like that's not it. I don't like this. I don't like this feeling. But I went through that. That was a big deal to me to be able to write a manuscript and finish it right at the end, and it has a beginning, a middle, and end. It makes some kind of sense, and that was good for me. And I set that aside, and I was such a at that time my kids were really little, and my daughter was just a toddler, and I was kind of dad. My oldest brother used to tell me stories about animals, and animals that we knew, like our dog and this pony and this kind of thing. Like, and so I would tell these stories to I would heard those from my brother. And then I would tell them to like my baby sister. I was always sort of that kind of a guy. So when I had kids, I was immediately just like telling them stories all the time, bedtime and on walks and all that kind of stuff. So we had this kind of robust, so there was this little bit of a weird thing. Like I was writing a little bit on the side. I was kind of like feeling my way through that vocation. But then like as a dad, I was telling stories just very naturally. And we'd also do like little Bible studies and that kind of thing. It was just like, that was just really natural for us. And I was writing a manuscript of a book called The Secret of the Valley. And I was about, I don't know how far, 40,000 words into it. I was like really liking it a lot. But then there on the other side, I was telling these stories to my kids, my oldest daughter and my son, Josiah, my aunt Ann and Josiah. And then we had a little baby. And I started, there was a day, which I've mentioned this in a lot of interviews, but there was a day where I was on the porch, we're going to tell Anne a story. It was kind of story time. We're sitting on the steps of our little porch out in the country in West Virginia, and there was rabbits hopping around in the yard. So I'll just tell her a story about rabbits. So I told her a story about an older sister and a younger brother, which is what she had. And they were named Hannah and Joe, which is kind of like Anne and Josiah. And they had a baby brother, which they did too. And I just told them the stories about them. They're really simple to begin with, but she loved it. I thought it was fun. So, the next day or a few days later, I tell her the next story in it. And it just became this serial that was our little story. We called The Rabbits at Jupiter's Crossing. And I would just tell them, on walks, and it was a long, many, many years where I just kept telling them stories. And that became this really special time for us. It was our little family story. And it came to this one day where there was a kind of a point of climax of the story. And we just kind of had this silence afterwards. And the kids were, Daddy, you gotta write this down. You need to make this a book. And so I was like, yeah, I think you're right. This is pretty cool. This is fun. And I genuinely, I've told this story a lot, but I genuinely believe like, oh, maybe this will just be our family story. But I quit writing the other book, which is a big no-no. You're supposed to finish what you start and stuff. It's so tempting to kind of work on other things. So it's a big no-no to do it. But I did the big no-no, and I quit writing that other book, and I started writing The Green Ember. Wow. And it was an iteration, but it was kind of it had all the heart and so many of the details of what we'd done together. And I thought, well, this is for our family. And like so it was really cool, Suzanne, because I really felt like, well, we already won. Like, this is a cool thing. This is a memorial of what we did together. They can share it with their kids. It can kind of like be in our family. Oh, crazy old Uncle Sam or Grandpa Sam. He had this story about rabbits, and here it is. And I thought, well, that's great. If that's what it is, that's cool. I love it. I'm a big believer in like when you invest in your family, like there's something powerful about that, and your own family's sort of lore and legends and stuff. And so that's what we had. And my brother-in-law Andrew, he was like, he really liked the story, and he's like, I think we should publish this. So we published it together, and I was a little reluctant to do that. Mm-hmm. But we did, and to our great surprise, there were a lot of other families who were hungry for the same kind of stories that our little family was. There were a lot more people out there like us that were hungry for what I call new stories with an old soul. And
Mm-hmm.
it was a new novel, with maybe some modern pacing, but it had that sort of classic virtue and the feel of old time, and this sort of epic, very Christian imagination. It's not an allegory or anything like that, but it's a very
Mm-hmm.
robust, sort of like informed. If you're a Christian, it's going to ring your bells a lot.
Yeah.
Uh, and it does. So that came from just like a very natural, very organic, very uncomplicated. I wasn't thinking about the market or like what's hot right now. I think it
Mm-hmm.
was probably the opposite of what was hot, because it was like traditional values, like very much against the zeitgeist in many, many ways.
Oh yeah.
Very old fashioned, very Christian, very classic kind of feeling. But it just took off. I think people were so starved for stories like that. I don't think it's maybe particularly like, oh, the greatest writing in the world. I don't think that's the case. I think it's good writing. It's fine.
It's
But I
good.
think people are so hungry for those kinds of stories that it just took off.
Well, I think that there's a lot of truth to a good story. You read, there's so many books, there's thousands, hundreds. Not every story is a good story. Some don't even come across as a story. There's just, but there is something about epic tales, and there's something about good triumphing over evil, and telling stories in these worlds where it's not threatening because we're not a rabbit, but we can imagine ourselves there, right? So I think that it's amazing to see the impact and the power of story. And, you experienced that with your own kids and then shared it with the rest of us. What were you doing for a job at that point in time?
Well, at one point I was working at a little cafe. Actually, probably when my journey started, I was probably at my lowest place professionally.
Yeah.
I was a person with a master's degree serving coffee and sandwiches at a little cafe, probably making $11 an hour, something like that, $10 an hour,
Yeah.
and had a little family. So that was a pretty low point, and in professionally. But at that for some reason I needed that job at that time, because my dad had always taught me that all work is honorable work.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd lost a better job, but then I've gone to that as kind of like I'll just do this until I can find another job. And I did that for probably a year, but I wrote so much during that year. And
Right.
when customers weren't there and didn't have anything to do, I would flip around the menu and I would write a bunch of notes. And so I wrote my first manuscripts there. And that was I can remember driving to work at 5 o'clock in the morning, on a holiday. The door to my little car didn't close properly, so I had to hold the door closed. I didn't have heat. It was
Oh wow.
freezing, icy roads, and I had like a towel to like wipe off
Yes.
the windshield because it would just fog up and
Right.
stuff. And I can remember just thinking, this is pretty low for things. And am I doing a good job? I was confronted with the whole like, I want to be a good provider,
Mm.
and
But it's like you said, I believe, isn't it amazing how you find yourself just where you need to be? God puts you where you need to be to do what he wants you to do. I think, it's like that was what you needed,
yeah,
like you said, and look at the creativity that came from that
yes,
season, right?
that is so true. And I had a lot of health trouble um, then and before then,
Mm-hmm.
and that's really kind of what thwarted my sort of singer songwriter stuff. Is I had a lot of health trouble, and actually that's what sort of turned me back to thinking about writing books, because I thought, well, I don't have to sing. I can, even if I can't go out or can't go on tour or anything like that. I can write from home, and maybe something
Mm-hmm.
will come from that. So there's I think part of your point is there's so much. Um, looking back, so much pain and so much suffering and difficulty
Mm-hmm.
that were part of forming not only just who I am and who I'm becoming, the character I'm becoming, but the stories that I tell. And I think
Yeah.
that's one of the main reasons why the Green Ember resonates with so many people, is because it's not a simple, like, typical sort of Christian story where it's like, oh, the kids disobeyed and they got in trouble, but then they did the right thing and
Mm.
everything worked out for them and they won the championship, or these sort of like simple kind of
Yeah.
moralistic tales, which maybe there's value for some of that kind of stuff, I think, to some degree. But I think that the way that this very simple rabbit story, well, it's kind of an epic rabbit story, but it accounts for the reality of suffering, and it doesn't shield kids. And I think it's helpful, like you were saying, that they're rabbits. I think that does help a child to be able to sort of like go through that. But I've heard from countless families that are going through childhood cancer or other suffering or loss or death, or and have said that these books were our books through this time, and they were so encouraging, and I believe that 100%. I think they're forged from pain and from difficulty and imperfection, and I think they take pain seriously, and they take children seriously, and they tell the truth about the world. They're dangerous. I always like to say I write dangerous stories that a lot of people are looking for, like safe, pat you on the head, everything you think's right. No, there's not going to be. But these are morally complex characters who are going through temptation and difficulty, and it's so much about keeping faith amid chaos, amid difficulty things, which I think is why it's so relevant to the world today, is because it's an encouragement to keep faith during really, really difficult times. And so I love that there's that there's that robust, but it would not have been possible were it not for
your own experiences.
Your own experience, just that it was forged. I just have the belief that beautiful things are given birth to through labor pains. And it's really hard, I think, and especially maybe in creative work. Maybe it's true in ministry too, but it's really hard to gain something or share something with the world that's powerful that doesn't come hard earned. Yeah, I just really believe that.
That's very true. Well, so you published your first book. When did you jump right in and continue writing? Had you already begun the rest of the story, so to speak, before you published? How was that?
I started thinking about it towards the end of writing the Green Ember, and more, and like thinking about, well, what if this was a series? What would that be like? And so I did think about it some, and left it open a little bit more to be natural to continue in a series. But I didn't have the whole thing planned out at that time. That sort of came later. But again, during this time, I'm like, our kids are little. I'm working 2 jobs. I'm coaching soccer. I'm volunteering in our church. I'm like, I have no margin at all. My dad was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer at this time. That year that I wrote the year that I wrote the Green Ember was just an absolutely nutty year, and I can't believe anything came from that. It was just astonishing. But the Lord draws straight lines with crooked sticks, and He just has done an amazing thing. I did pretty quickly write Ember Falls, and that was to me a big test. That was the second book in that series, and I did kind of think. And it was a pretty heavy one too. Like there was some significant loss in that book. I actually changed the name of the book from, I was going to call it The Flight of the Long Treaders, to Ember Falls, as an indicator to parents this was going to be tough. It was kind of like The Empire Strikes Back, the second part of the story where it's like, oh, things go bad, which is kind of a classic thing to happen in a series. But I remember my mom read it and she was like, this is too tough. Like, I don't know if your people are going to go with you on this. But I had this belief that maybe, like, if this works, if they'll stick with me through this tough book, then I've got something here, And I thought, this is a story that I want to tell. This is how I wanted to do it. And people, so we released that, and there was just such an overwhelming, people loved it, and they were so, and I felt such unity and so supported, and so I've never thought of myself as I'm this elite artist, and I've got to express myself, and I've got so much brilliance inside of me, and I'll just express myself, and then people will gather around and they'll see myself. I don't think that self-expression is really a Christian view of art. I think of it as love and service, and there is self-expression involved, obviously. That's not the heart of it. It's not about just express yourself. I don't think that's what the heart of art is. It's storytelling. There's people, and you want to give them a gift, and you don't want to give them exactly what they want. It's like food. You don't want to just give a candy bar, but there, you want to have dessert too. And there's a robust sort of view of loving the audience, loving the reader. And that was a heavy book in a lot of ways, but they just, I feel such an alliance. Like I'm an ally to these parents who are like
Yeah.
in the trenches with their kids and need good stories, like to help shape who they are and have these conversations. I've received just tens of thousands of letters from parents just who are like, wow, we had this great conversation about suffering. We had this great conversation about the kingdom of God. We had this great conversation about selfishness, about, self-sacrifice, about love, about what real love is. There's just so many things have happened as a result. And I feel this kinship, not a superiority, but like, hey, we're in this together. Like I'm trying to support you guys and you have been generous to support me. And that really was like forged with that second book. So that when I got to the third book, Ember Rising, that's when I quit my job. And I am generally an anxious person. Like that's probably something that's, like a lot of artists, I'm very introspective and I tend to worry and tend to be anxious and maybe tend toward like depression or that sort of stuff, like feel the weight of the world real heavily. And I was super, I had a lot of like, some anxiety about leaving my job. I had a good job at that point. I left the cafe. I was working in adult education. And I had a good job. I was traveling and, I was home every night, but I was traveling to like 13 different counties, spent a lot of time in the car, be able to think through things and listen to books and sermons and Bible and really create a lot in my mind. And it was very, very good job. So I had this decision about leaving that job. But that's when I wrote Ember Rising, which is the third book in the Green Ember series at that time. And generally I would have been very, very anxious about that at that time. But the Lord gave me so much peace during that, so much. And I just wrote that's the best book I think I've written. I loved it so much. And it was so, it was such a gift from the Lord that period. And I don't know, something really special happened there. And there was a lot of songs in that book. And it was just it was a real fruitful sort of thing, but it came out of, it came out of this sort of like, confidence, that I was in sync with the audience and that we were like, we were teammates kind of. I felt like, good. And this sense of peace from the Lord that he was going to take care of us and our family, that I am a provider for my family, but I'm not the provider. That he was going to look after our family, and if we were obedient in this calling, and he has definitely done that.
And your family has been really helpful to you as well with the business side of what you've done. So
for sure,
you've learned a lot, but they have as well as a result of the journey you were on. I think that's one of the beautiful things about serving, and that being your heart. That being where you're coming from, like you said, it isn't about your self-expression. It's about loving and serving others. And in the process, you brought your kids and your wife along and they're doing the same thing, and I think it opens up a world of them being able to see, how am I going to use the gifts that now I've been given, and I love to see, when we do see each other, I love to see your family with you and helping you and the work that they do with you, together. I get to experience a lot of the same in my own world. And has a huge impact, on your family. But to know that the stories that you've written have had such an impact on people's lives, that's so rewarding. Because I think all of us want nothing more than for our work to be meaningful and to be understood and to be valued by others, and I think storytelling is a beautiful place to bring all of that together for people. I love stories, and most people do. I don't think I know anybody that doesn't love a good story, right? And I think it just is, it's amazing to me to see authors like you, to hear your story and to hear, how this is like grown and how it's come together and developed. Because it's like you said, a lot of it, you went through a lot of painful things and experiences, but it made you so much more prolific in writing about it, and sharing it and coming alongside your readers and those families. What are you working on now What do you have that's not
Well,
secret?
we what's funny is that book that I was writing when I quit writing the to write the Green Ember. I finished
Mm-hmm.
writing that book, and that'll be out at some point. I don't know exactly when, but I'm kind of working on the details of figuring out that story. That's interesting. So that'll be
Oh yeah.
outside of the Green Ember world. And I've got a few other little books that are outside the Green Ember world. The Misses with Bazookas, which is a funny, goofy book, and then I'm
Mm-hmm.
writing the Jack Zulu series with my son Josiah Caleb, and that's been really fun. I wrote a book called The Found Boys that just came out this year. And then I've had 3 books come out this year, and the last one was the 11th Green Ember book, the
Wow.
Lost Key, it's called. And so that's
Mm-hmm.
a new series. So there's more new Green Ember to come, and people seem to have a real appetite for that. And I love sharing in that world. That's the first Green Ember, the book that's come out in the last 3 years, and I'm really excited. We've had an amazing response to that, and I'm excited about staying in that world.
Good.
Probably do some more things in that world and out. But I'm always I have a writing course that we've done called the Green Writer, which I love sharing with people. There's a lot of it is free.
Yeah.
You can kind of check it out and see if it would be good for your family. And I love that. I love serving young writers. There's so many people. I've got involved with the Young Writers Workshop, which is another wonderful outlet, and I spend time with them. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I'm still, I really want to be faithful to the Lord. I want to say yes to his calling on my life. I want to follow him. I want to serve families and kids. I want to increasingly spend more and more of my time doing the thing that is most rare, the gift that I have that is most rare. And I think, which is storytelling and writing. I want to do that more.
Mm-hmm.
There's always all these other things to do around a
Well,
small business. A small family business, but I want to do that more and more, and that's my heart, and that's my goal, and I get to do it a lot, and
yeah.
I'm really really grateful.
What piece of advice would you give to someone? I know you say you work with young writers, but young, also maybe that's not a youthful writer, but somebody that starts later in life, or just somebody who's working through the process of becoming that writer. What's your best piece of advice?
The thing that pops into my mind immediately, and there's a million things, but the thing that immediately when you were asked that question was this idea of take the long cut, and there's a notion with writing, or with maybe probably a lot of things, that I like stories and I have a message, and so therefore I'll write a story and it'll have my message in it, and I'll use this way of doing something to convey this important thing that I think.
Right.
And I think that's fine, maybe, but I mean, I would invite someone to consider, it would be really great if there was a strong Christian who played basketball for the New York Knicks. I really like basketball, and I like this message that I want to convey. So I'll go play basketball for the Knicks. There's a certain arrogance to thinking I can just do this because it's I know how to write a sentence and I know how to, I think I think that part of that sort of robust view of vocation and creation is respecting that, someone who makes incredible meals, or someone who's a homemaker who is just really organized and really has their stuff together at home and is a good parent, that's easy. I think that it's that's a little bit disrespectful. No, you can't just walk into that. That takes training and years and,
Right.
and obedience and suffering and all kinds of stuff there's associated with forming that. So I would say we need to have respect. And I think sometimes Christians can be guilty of I'll just use that medium. I want to tell people about the gospel or some very important truth.
Mm.
So obviously anybody can make a movie or make music or make a story. That's not a big deal. I think we sometimes don't have a respect for that medium. And so I would say and then on top of that, there's this idea that and there's so many forces preying on people who are writers, because writers tend to be kind of I want somebody to tell me I'm okay. I want some affirmation. I'm hungry for approval. So then, and I want to get to where I see where this person is. I'd like to get where they are, but we don't sometimes account for what was involved in their journey, what suffering was there, what they went through, what did they learn, what was it. did they read 10,000 books? Did they, you think about someone like C.S. Lewis or J.R. Tolkien, like you can't be them. You just can't.
Right.
Like, good luck, having the robust, and the good news is the world doesn't need another C.S. Lewis. It needs probably, if you're called to it, it probably needs your gifts, like where you are. You don't have to be perfect or anything, but there's a process to it, and people will be saying, oh, you can take this shortcut. Oh, here's a shortcut. If you just do this, oh, if you pay me to do this, then I can give you this insight, and it'll give you a shortcut. And I would just say, don't listen to that. Take the long cut. Do the work. You can't not short circuit it. You cannot become a master chef by reading the back of ingredients on a hamburger helper one time. You can't do that. Like, you could make one meal that way or something. It's not the end of the world, but you cannot become a master chef. So you got to put in the work. You've got to read. It's like, so I think respect the vocation enough to invest in it. You will not get there by like, I'll just do it every once in a while or something. Like, that's just not true. Like, it takes time, it takes energy, it takes attention. And I'm not saying it's not possible. I would just say, like, go in with the respect. And also, there's so many lessons learned on the long cut that you will never become the person you could be, to tell the stories you can tell, if you try to take all the shortcuts. Because it's in the long cut. It's in the long journey that you pick up the skill set to become the kind of person who brings value to serve and love the people that you're called to love and serve in this way. So that's something. I don't know if that's not discouraging. I actually mean it as an encouraging thing. Like,
no, I love that.
Embrace the pain. Like, you can't become a Green Beret if you're just like, I'll just jog every once in a while. No, you got to like go through heck to become that. And I'm just saying, like, there's no shortcut.
Yeah, I love that. The respect of that process, or any valuable and worthwhile process and journey. So I know we're going to wrap it up here in a minute, and I thank you so much for your time with me. I know that this is probably difficult sometimes when I ask this question, but it's a curious question for me, and I always love to hear the answers. And that is, what quote might there be, wherever it may have come from, a parent, a book, a movie, whatever, resonates in your mind and encourages you, or has encouraged you through a season of your life?
Well, the one that comes to mind immediately, like you, I'll probably think of a million different things from Scripture. I think of John the Baptist, who said, a man cannot receive even one thing unless it is given to him from heaven. And I think about, the gift of God, and even tracing back what we've talked about, my parents, and the circumstances of my life have been, with pain, without pain. These kinds of things have been a gift from God. But here's my quote that I would cling to and love, and maybe I don't even know all the reasons why. But one of my favorite books is "Cry the Beloved Country" by Alan Paton, and it's a book about South Africa, and it's set very near where I live there, written in the 60s. It's a beautiful book, and there's a character in there who is an umfundisi. He's a priest, he's a pastor, and he's a Zulu man. Msamango, and he says, "I am a weak and sinful man, but God put his hand on me." And I love that so much, and I feel like that accounts for. That's my story. That's how I feel.
Says it all.
It does. I mean, that what's this magic that has happened with the Green Ember in the world and resonate? Like, my answer to that is, God put his hand on me. I can't. And I think this idea that God draws straight lines with crooked sticks is another one that's like an old saying that I cling to, because I am a crooked stick, and he's done amazing things and does amazing things with very, very weak and broken people. But I'm a weak and sinful man, but God has put his hand on me.
Isn't that the story of all of history, though? Right?
Yeah. Yes.
And it's amazing. I love that quote, and I thank you for sharing it, because there's so much truth in it, and it resonates with me for sure, and I'm sure with a lot of other people. But again, thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you again soon in Florida. Yeah. Almost paradise down here.
It is. Everybody's going to Florida. It's the happening place.
It's the happening place. But thank you, and we will talk again soon.
Yeah. Thank you for having me on, Suzanne. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thanks for listening to the Not by the Book podcast from the Florida Parent Educators Association. To learn more about homeschooling in Florida or to find resources to help you on this amazing journey, visit our website at FPEA.com. If you have any suggestions for future guests, contact me, Suzanne, at notbythebook@fpea.com. Thanks again for listening, and be inspired to live your life not by the book.